Welcome back to season 3 of the Venue Success Podcast, where every episode this season is a quick, actionable tip from Tirzah to help you elevate your venue. And today we are talking about working with family. And as I was preparing for just a few, and today's going to be pretty short, just fair warning, because this is kind of like Pandora's box. We could talk about if you work for your parents or if you have kids work for you or so many different, or if your spouse works for you, just so many different dynamics. And I'm just going to briefly kind of hit an overview of this. And this is actually something that when I'm working with my full service clients, that we take a deep dive into this specific topic, because most venues, there are some family dynamics connected to it. And, I think as venues, it is such a big endeavor. It's a little bit different than opening a photography company or even a bakery. Like, it is just such a big endeavor that a lot of times there's financial complications where it's like, well, the parents own the property, but you and your spouse built the venue and you're running your business on their property. And so there's just, oh my gosh, like so many different dynamics that we could get into. And they are all pretty challenging to navigate for sure. But I have to just say, what a blessing. What a great blessing to be able to work with our families and our businesses at our venues. It's such a great thing. And I know for a lot of us, you would agree, but you would probably also agree that there has been difficult dynamics that you've had to navigate and hard conversations and maybe falling out. And unfortunately, I have met people that have started businesses together as a husband and wife and lost their marriage over the challenges, not being able to get kind of break through the challenges that they face as couples running that venue together, right? Because a lot of us run our businesses differently. And so I want to bring attention to this topic because I do feel that it's not talked about enough. And so I'm just going to touch on a couple of things today, and I look forward to hearing your feedback as well. So let's talk about first hiring family for part-time positions. And this could be banquet staff, mowing the lawn, whatever it is that you have part-time positions for, right? Even something more client-facing like doing tours or things like that. It's very important that you put your family member through the same interview process. Now, I hope that you have, first of all, an interview process. We're business owners. We need to be professional about that. And you need to create a guideline for, first of all, a job description. Every position that you should hire should have a job description. Please, I hope that you have that. You should understand what is an ideal candidate and then put them through the process of actually physically coming in, sitting across a desk from you and going through the process. Now, that might feel a little bit weird for you, but it is really, really important because it's not only for them to understand that they are going through the normal channels. It's important for them to see that you in this scenario, right? So maybe you're hiring a niece or nephew, right? That they come and they sit across a desk from you. You ask them these questions and it benefits them as well, right? Because it gives them interview practice, which is really important for them. But it also lets them see, hey, in this situation, this isn't Auntie necessarily. This is a potential boss, and I need to see this person as such. This is really important. I'm going to guess that most of you that have hired family members probably haven't done this, and I would definitely start doing this. The other thing, and I wish I didn't have to say this, but I think it is really important, is that you need to be careful to not publicly show favoritism. And hear how I said that. Don't publicly show favoritism. Believe me, if I hired my niece, nephew, my son or daughter, there's favoritism. They're my family, and of course, they are close to my heart. However, if you have a team like mine where we had 35 part-time staff, it was really important, and actually for my nieces, nephews, and my kids, that they didn't want to feel that they were getting special treatment either, because it made their friends, could potentially make their friends annoyed at them, right? And so when it came to scheduling, when it came to winning awards that we would have, like we would have these really fun incentives. Every month we had an employee of the month, and there were certain ways that you could win that. My kids, nieces and nephews, siblings, they didn't get special attention. And in fact, many of them asked to not be included in those monthly like incentives that we would do for employee of the month because they didn't, again, they were very worried about favoritism and also attention, right? You want to be sure if you're, say, you're coming into your reception space and you've got 10 part-time staff and everyone's working, don't just go straight to your kids or your relatives. Be sure that you are giving attention to all of your staff as equally as possible. That's really, really important when it comes to just even your team culture, to be sure that you are giving attention to everyone and, again, being cautious about public favoritism. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about working with your spouse. And again, we could probably have a whole entire season about this. And this is when I'm consulting with people, I often joke that I'm really grateful that I have a bit of a background. I never finished it, but I had started going to school to get my master's in counseling. And I always joke with people that I'm really glad I did that because I use those classes quite a bit in my consulting and working with couples, and have navigated some pretty challenging things myself when it comes to working with my spouse. So let me give you a little background about my husband is Bradley. We've been married for this year 26 years, which is crazy. And he's been in and around the weddings forever. So I met him when I was 18 and he was 19. And after we started dating, we went to school in Chicago. He would come home because it wasn't too far away from where I lived in St. Louis, that he would come home with me and he would work weddings, right? So he's been in and around the wedding industry for a very long time as well. So we always talk, publicly about how I've been in it for 33 years. He has been in it almost that same amount of time, obviously in a different capacity. And so when I grew up in the wedding industry, did weddings, even when he was a pastor doing weddings, I was doing coordination and planning, blah, 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 all that. And I would actually, even when we moved to different places, I was helping our venues because our family, we've owned 5. And so I would fly from Florida when we lived down there. For 5 years, I flew up to North Carolina running this venue. And my mom owned it at the time. And so Bradley wasn't super involved in it at that moment. But when we moved to North Carolina, this is just a little side note, my mom owned the venue. I had been running it from the very beginning. And when I came to North Carolina, the dynamic of our relationship was really challenging. And I will just leave it at that. But it was not good for me. And so I actually quit. Again, this is not the time or the place to talk about that situation, but we just ran things very differently and it was just too hard for me. So when it came about that we ended up buying that venue, Bradley came alongside and became a partner with me in that endeavor. And we started working together at the venue, but you could already see the dynamic, right? I had been basically sold the first 50 weddings at this venue with a picture of just a blueprint, right? So I had been building this business from the very, very beginning. And then all of a sudden, my husband comes in who has a very different set of talents and abilities, right? Great talents and abilities, but different. Very, very different personality for sure. And so all of a sudden, I'm like, you're coming into my world, and this doesn't feel super great. And so there's a couple things, many, many things that we had to learn along the way, but let me just give you a few little pointers. What are the boundaries? What is the balance that you're going to have between your home life and work? And this is a very important conversation to have. And even if you've been working with your spouse for, 5 years or more, whatever, I think this is a good conversation to have with them to make sure that you are absolutely on the same page, that there are certain things that need to stay at work and certain things that need to stay at home. Bradley and I drove to our venue back and forth every single day. We were with each other all of the time. And it was like when we got in the car, we talked most of the time we talked about work on the way to work. Sometimes we would talk about work on the way home. But one of the things that was abundantly clear, and this couldn't be perfectly done all the time because, as you know, when you own a business, there are unexpected things that you have to deal with, and you can't have always perfectly clear boundaries around not talking about your venue when you're at home. But one of the things that we learned, I have insomnia. I've struggled with sleep my whole life. And sometimes Bradley would like bring up something that just came into his mind and he would just like vent about it for 5 minutes and then fall asleep in 30 seconds. Is any other person out there with me with that spouse like that? Oh my gosh. And he's like sawing logs and I'm laying there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, just ruminating on this thing that he just dropped into my lap right before we went to bed. Okay. So that was something that I had to communicate to Bradley, like, hey, please don't talk about work. Even if it's a good thing, I don't want to talk about work in bed right before we go to sleep. Another thing that our kids came to us about was, sometimes we would get home from work, I'm making dinner, we're still in this work mode, right? Like a high achieving mode, brain's going a mile a minute. And we sit down at the table and all of a sudden we're still talking about work and our poor kids are sitting there like, please stop. And so they told us many a time, can you please stop talking about work? And so that was something that we had to be very cognizant of to like put that away when we're at the dinner table. Another thing that I would just caution you about, and again, we had 6 full-time staff besides me and Bradley, and then 35 part-time staff, right? And do you think that there were ever dynamics where I was frustrated at Bradley or Bradley was frustrated at me, and it would be very tempting to talk negatively about that person to your staff? Because we were very close little family. Absolutely tempting. But I want to caution you to not ever do that because you want to be very respectful about your spouse to your team. Again, when you talk about team dynamics, that's really important. You wouldn't do that about any other staff member, I hope. So you shouldn't do it about your spouse either. Another thing kind of along those lines is to not publicly correct them in front of your staff. I will say this was probably a big challenge for both Bradley and I because we would also, because of our personalities, tend to want to navigate challenges differently. If a certain situation came up, like I'm a very fast processor. I go through A through Z, but I go fast. And Bradley just takes more time to get to usually the same spot, but we just process differently, right? And so in our understanding of that, we realized like sometimes if I went too fast, he would be like pushing back, or if he went too slow, I would be pushing back, right? And you would want to be careful that you're not doing that publicly in front of your full-time or part-time staff. Really, really important. The other thing that we learned is that we needed to have a clear chain of command so that the staff knew who to come to with any given situation. This is very important, very important. We had, again, with our personalities, we would deal with things differently. And so there were certain staff that would feel more comfortable coming to me and certain staff that would be maybe more comfortable coming to Bradley. But predominantly, people would kind of gravitate towards me, even if it wasn't something that I was responsible for. And so it's really important, I'm all about a good little flow chart that you have that as part of even publicly. We had it posted in our hallway, actually at our offices and everyone had a copy of it. Like, here is our roles. This is the chain of command. Here's who you would basically talk to if X, Y, or Z were to happen. And so that was also really important. So, for example, if the air conditioning stopped working in our barn, who would they go to? Bradley was our director of facilities. And so they would know that they would go to Bradley. Now, if someone came to me and was like, Tirzah, the air conditioner is out in the barn, what would I say? You need to talk to Bradley about that. Thank you for sharing that with me. Please go talk to Bradley about that. If an upset client situation happened as a general manager, I dealt with all of that type of client facing things. If they came to Bradley and were like, oh, this person is upset about something happened with their payment or blah, 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 blah. and they're upset, someone needs to talk to them. If they went to Bradley, he would know you need to take that to Tirzah and she will deal with that. So with that I will say the only way to know that is with a clear job description. So yes, even if it is just you and your spouse and no other full-time staff working at your venue, please have a job description. It's so very important because you need to understand what lane that you each need to be in. There are some lanes that maybe you'll share, but you need to know what those lanes are because you're not going to share all the lanes. I have never seen a situation in which a couple was running a business together and they both did everything. Now, there might be some exceptions to that rule, but the thing is, everyone has unique abilities and passions. And so you want to make sure also that you are doing things that you are more passionate about. It would not have ever made sense to put Bradley in a position where he is client facing, dealing with an upset bride. That makes no sense at all. Now, could he step in if I was sick or out of the country or something was happening? Could he step in? Absolutely, he could. Could I step in if he was out of town and the air conditioner went out? Well, duh, absolutely, I could have, right? But it is going to be best for your relationship for both of you to have clear job descriptions. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. For us, my team knew, there will be no shocker here, that we have this joke all the time where I'd be like, I'm the boss. I'm the boss. I'm the boss. And we were silly about it, but it was also kind of my way to be like, the buck stops with me, kind of. I'm the general manager. Bradley obviously has a voice in things, but when it came down to it, we knew I made the majority of the final call on things. And that was totally fine with Bradley because he didn't really even want that responsibility. And this was my world that he kind of came into. So it made sense for that. So it doesn't mean that you wouldn't have private conversations as with your spouse, your business partner, about a given thing and kind of get on the same page with one another. I would say that those conversations are behind closed doors and you always, obviously want to be a great united front to your team, to your full-time staff, part-time staff, your vendors, your clients, all of that. Super important. But again, it all starts with very clear job descriptions and great communication with one another. Because sometimes it takes a minute to figure out what do I want to do? What do you want to do? What are the things that actually give us some joy and sense of purpose in this endeavor that we have, right? For Bradley, we found over the course of time that he wasn't as excited about working outside in the facilities and, he wanted to be in a more director position. And so we hired someone that was kind of more hands-on, kind of the one getting muddy and dirty outside. Of course, he would at times as well. But he found that he really liked the administrative side of his job. And so when I learned that about him, it was really important for me to move our team around and hire strategically to get people that would take some of those more cumbersome parts of his job off. The same was for me. I got to the point after 2,500 plus weddings, I'm like, hi, dude, I'd be fine if I never coordinated another wedding again. I want to kind of lean into more business growth and being able to have the mental capacity to think and strategize about added revenue streams and things that only really I could do. I'm like, I need to hire someone to take this chunk of my responsibility off of my plate so that I could, really be a great GM. And so again, these job descriptions morph and change with time, with seasons. When our kids were in high school and they were really active in sports, it was different than when we became empty nesters, right? So again, this is something that you should evaluate every single year. And so when I talk about having job descriptions, even for your part-time staff, Everyone should have a job description. And if you don't have one, it's really hard to do your reviews with your team if you don't have kind of a baseline with them as well. So again, there's so much more that I could say about this. I think the bottom line is it's really important to understand your roles and responsibilities. Now, let me just, before we close, talk a little bit about working with a parent. And I actually think in some ways this is the hardest dynamic. It really is. Sometimes it's generational differences, just the way our parents view things. Maybe they don't understand the way that Gen Z buys. They don't understand the way that they like to communicate. Again, it's maybe there's not anything wrong with what your parent is saying. It's just like different now with, you know, gosh, this generation is really, really different. I think an older generation was taught that command and control was the way to go. And it's all about just, demanding respect and not earning it. And for me, I am more of a trust and inspire type of leader where I wanted to obviously have respect of the people that worked for me, but I didn't demand it. I earned it. And so it's just a really different generational thing, I think, when you come in and if you're a trust and inspire type of leader and your parent is command and control, that causes a really challenging dynamic. And that could be true maybe even with your spouse too, but it's good to understand, hey, we are viewing this situation from a totally different lens, and we need to figure out like what is best for each other, what is best for our team, and be able to have open conversations about that. And again, I think that's tricky because when it's your parent, it's hard for them to not parent you. And I think when you're in a spouse relationship, you're more maybe adept at talking through challenging things and knowing that it's really important for you to communicate well with one another. And like at the end of the day, you got to go to bed with that person and you need to be able to continue harmoniously with them. I think sometimes with a parent, things can go unsaid, things can go like unresolved because you're not forced into that like more, you know, face to face, right? Daily relationship with them, maybe like it's just different with a spouse and with a parent. And so I feel like a lot of the times when I'm talking to people about their parent dynamics, they don't feel the freedom to talk openly about the way that they feel. And they feel like it won't be received well. They just don't understand me, whatever the case may be. And so I don't know what your particular dynamic is, but I would just say it all comes back to respect and being able to have open, honest conversations. Like having the conversation is so important. When things go unsaid, resentment builds. And when resentment builds, relationships can be fractured. And when that happens, it really can ultimately damage that relationship long term and damage your business, which none of us want that by any means. So talk to each other. It's so really, really, really important. And sometimes the most kind of non confrontational way to do that is to say, I was listening to this podcast by this lady that I really like, the Venue Success podcast, and she was talking about how important it is to have job descriptions, and it made me realize we don't have one, and I'd really love to do that as kind of an exercise, me and you. So can we work on that together, right? So just open the conversation, and you might be surprised how well it actually goes. So I think that's all I will say about this for now. This is already longer than I thought it was going to be. But again, it's such a joy to work with your family. I mean, yes, I bought my venue from my mom. However, my sister was a coordinator at my venue. She also became our photographer there. Both of my kids work for me. I had countless nieces and nephews work for me. My dad was our in-house officiant, which was super amazing. Lots of family dynamics. My mom, myself, and my brother, we've all owned venues. And so we kind of understood each other kind of even on a different level than everybody else. But what a joy. I mean, at the end of the day, even if you're in a stressful, hard situation with a family member, just know like it's worth it to figure it out. It really is. It's worth it. Even if it's with your spouse and you're having some really challenging dynamics. Gosh, you guys, this is kind of like the American dream, right? To be able to build a business, to be able to dictate the terms for your life, I don't call owning a venue financial, like I don't call it freedom. Like I just never felt that it was freedom. But I do think it's flexibility, that you've created a flexible life where you're not having to answer to a boss, right? You're not having to ask permission to take a vacation. Gosh, just remember all of the reasons why you got into this and the blessing that it is, and try to not focus on all of the negative elements of it because you can figure it out. You absolutely can figure it out. So that's all I have for you today, my friends. I will see you next time on the Venue Success Podcast.